Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome. Welcome to Bayou Teche Writing Workshop. The title is Setting the Character, Leveraging Place in Your Writing with Allison Alsup and Jessica Kinnison. Allison and Jessica are co-founders of the New Orleans Writers Workshop. During this workshop, you will learn that setting involves more than just describing a given location and time. Okay. Oh, there you
guys, actually, I was caught.
Oh, I'm sorry.
It's not setting the character. It's actually setting as character. Setting as character, right? All right. Can everyone hear me? All right. Yeah, maybe I'm a little taller. Just here. Okay. I'm going to do my best. All right. So I just want to say who we are at first. New Orleans Writers Workshop. We are a nonprofit. We are essentially co-founders, Jessica and I. We've been around for several years, and our mission is to offer affordable creative writing classes for adults, regardless of their experience and background with creative writing. So we do this mostly in person in New Orleans. Occasionally we offer Zoom courses. And then in addition to that, we work one-on-one with creative writers in terms of developing their manuscripts. And that's who we are. We both work in terms of keeping it afloat. We both teach. We both also do editing. And then we have other people who teach for us as well, right? We offer classes in poetry, nonfiction, fiction, and other genres as well, hybrid genres. So are there any writers here today? It's just great. Welcome. Any would-be thinking about maybe becoming a writer at some point? I knew it. All right. Guys, I have two goals, or I should say we have two goals for today. The first is to be thinking about some ideas and principles, some concepts, guiding concepts here about setting. And maybe to push your ideas of how you can leverage setting on the page beyond the usual suspects. And the second goal that I have is for us to be able to apply some of these principles in hands-on exercises. All right, so you don't have to turn in your work. There will be no quiz, but you will get the most out of the next hour if you actually attempt to do the exercises. So how this is going to go is we'll talk a little bit, and then we're going to do an exercise. We'll talk a little bit, we'll do an exercise, and hopefully we'll get through all three of these today. Okay, so those are our two goals: thinking about setting, guiding principles, and then being able to have this as actionable, right? Actionable items when you are alone, manning the missile silo and writing and facing the screen, right? So first things first, how do we define setting? This is the audience participation part. So setting, not a trick question here. What do we mean by when we say setting? Like place, right? Anything else? Yes, you guys are ahead of the game already. So keep in mind, it's not just place, because setting a given place can change over time, right? So it's both the time and the place. Here's another not trick question. Why might setting be important for your narrative? And sometimes I'm going to use the word story, but just be a little bit gentle with me. It can apply to poetry. It can apply to nonfiction, right? Just prose in general, but also with verse. Why might setting be important for your narrative? Yeah. That's right. We want to bring the reader into the story for them to be able to see. Can anyone think of any other reason why setting might be significant? Yeah.
Characters are important with those.
Absolutely. What do you mean by that?
So, like, it's the way that they act, like, where they, maybe, it's something, it's a little bit too far of a walk away to take things in.
Setting informs, it's a cultural surround, right? It informs who we are. It helps to give us our identity, sometimes for the better, sometimes for the worse, right? Okay, what else? Yes, you, my dear, you.
Plausibility of events.
Corey, what do you mean by that?
Well, I mean, if you have something that it's essential to have snow for, happening, you obviously couldn't have that in Louisiana in the dead of summer.
Okay. Credibility, bringing the reader in, informing who the characters and the culture, right, who lives in this particular place. These are all great responses, okay? So when we talk about setting as character, right, this is where things can become a little bit more complicated. I just want to say is that our talk here is driven by us as functioning writers, us as working writers, also us in terms of what we've seen in the classroom and receiving people's work. So this is how these ideas have been formed. But I wanted to talk about this idea of how can a setting be a character or function like a character. And there's just a few ideas on here, and then I'm going to turn it over to Jessica to talk for a bit. But when I think about how setting can be like a character, I'm thinking about how setting evidences very distinct, nuanced, and compelling personality, just in the same way that a person might. Locations, places, and time have a distinct set of characteristics and nuances. So if we do not just think of them as a flat, static background, but we really think of them as a compelling force, they take on almost a character-like quality. Another way that a setting can be like a character is that they can have an effect on the events in your narrative. Again, because settings don't remain static backdrops, when we have stories that interact with them, when the setting becomes a living, breathing force, it can actually help to shape the pacing and the events of a story, right? And the last way, at least, that I'm thinking of for today's talk, that I am thinking about setting like a character, is that just like our human relationships, dialogues, and interaction, a setting can give us insight, back to this idea of the character, of what our characters are thinking about, feeling, reflecting, ruminating about. It's the idea, and we'll talk about this in the hour to come, how the external landscape can start to inform the internal landscape of your characters. All of this by way of saying that when I have read the work of others' writing and when I endeavor in my own, I try to avoid as much as possible the typical trap of just thinking of setting as a static, pretty, or even exotic backdrop, but as something that is living, dynamic, and that is, when leveraged, becomes this force that helps to shape the events and the characters themselves in the story. All right? Yes.
Can you also have a situation of where the character sets the setting, or where the setting is a manifestation, a mirror of what the character is feeling?
My friend, could you wait 25 minutes until I yield and get, Jessica's going to come up, but you are anticipating exactly what we're getting to in part 3. This connection between the character's mindset and the external world. Yes.
I'm going to give it over to Jessica. Hey, that was a good segue.
Good afternoon, everyone. Hi. Hey, I'm Jessica Kinnison, co-founder with Allison of the Writers Workshop. We both live in New Orleans. I grew up in Mississippi, and I actually went to a place-based MFA program. So I thought about this a lot over the last 20 years or so. So I'm going to talk a little bit about sensory details. So we're building toward what the gentleman just asked about, sensory details and how the environment affects us. And then Allison's going to pick up on kind of how we affect our environment, right? So does anybody in here know a good liar?
Yeah.
What's a characteristic of a good liar?
The young blind.
They don't blink, right? They're sure that it's true, or at least they're showing that they're sure that it's true. Say it again. Charming, yeah.
The guy with the details to that one.
Right.
Little ratio, not too much, not too little.
Exactly. Right. Concrete, specific details. Right. Like, you know, I was talking to my dad the other day and I was thinking, he said he went to the post office, but I think he didn't. Right. And then he started talking about how he ran into somebody we both know at the post office. And he was wearing a shirt with flamingos on it. And he was talking about his twin granddaughters and something specific about their soccer game. Right. And I'm like, okay, maybe he went to the post office, but I don't know if he did or didn't. Right. But the concrete, specific details, the person, the clothing, the dialogue, right? All the setting that he described sounded plausible, right? It sounded like it could have happened. So that's what I want to talk about a little bit over the next few minutes. So written words, I think like the woman said in the cool tie-dye pants back there, written words are symbols representing sounds. And the sounds themselves are symbols representing things, actions, qualities, spatial relationships, and so on, right? Written words are two removes from experience, okay? We're building a world as writers. Unlike the images on a film, which directly strike the eye and the ear, words are transmitted first to the mind, and we got to get it out to that liar's universe, right? That sounds real, so that we believe it. They must be translated into images, okay? So they got to go filter out to a real world in our minds, right? This is our task as writers. How do we translate it into the world, into the reality for our readers, like the post office my dad was talking about, right? The more specific a setting or image is, the more universal it becomes, even if it's, outer space, even if it's someplace we don't actually know about that much, as long as it's specific, concrete, sensory, that's when it comes to life, right? The more specific it is, the more universal it becomes. The amazing things about us as humans is that we don't have to experience it to experience it, right? Like I don't know, raise your hand if you feel like you've been to a world that you've read about. Like, I know I have, right? Yeah. So what I mean is we have a capacity to imagine new worlds that maybe are adjacent to our normal ones, or maybe they are something that doesn't exist, right? The way we do this is, again, specific, definite, concrete, particular details, all right? A detail is definite or concrete when it appeals to the senses, so seen, heard, smelled, tasted, touched, right? And I think we all know that just from being alive. Senses take us past the thought to perception, right? So we're not just like, these are words on page, this is symbol, it's more like we've lived it, which I can tell you have lived through books like me. Sometimes I wonder if it actually happened to me, I love books so much. So part of the pleasure of reading also is that egotistical thing. We don't want the writer to tell us how to understand it. We want to feel it, right? And I think that's where the sensory details come in. So Allison challenged me to bring in some of my own work since we're all writers here and it's a pretty informal conference. So I brought in two of my poems. Just a little background. I started as a fiction writer. That's what I studied. Then I wrote plays. And in recent years, pandemic got me into writing poetry. So that's where I'm at. And I wanted to read two poems that represent what I'm talking about. So this is the first one. It's called Blue Heron. I saw a man pulling an open 5-gallon container of water down the road in a red radio flyer wagon, careful not to spill, and I was glad. Saw 25 cars in line for crawfish on St. Bernard, pots boiling, up and down the sidewalk, and I was glad. Saw a squat boy in a striped shirt walking a yellow snake, and I was glad. I waited with no urgency for the blue heron to get closer. When he flew right over my head, silver fish jumped up all at once in my chest. Right? This doesn't describe a lot about the environment, but the details I chose demonstrate a tone, right? It's got a lot of space in it, got a lot of room to breathe. The rhythm of the repetition of "and I was glad" kind of gets you going in that way of like, this is slow, this is feeling like a safe place, right? And then stacking the types of images, the colors, the sensory details, it's bringing in the setting. I didn't have to say we were in New Orleans, I don't think, right? Maybe I have a sort of tainted audience, but I didn't have to say I was in New Orleans. So stacking of types of images, and then result in the speaker being absorbed, right? The fish were no longer outside, they were in my chest, right? So that's one way to get all the sensory details, to get the landscape working for you, right? And the setting. Does that make sense? Okay, let's try it. Want to? Okay. All right, so I passed around some prompts. Okay, so usually I wouldn't have them all on the same page, so don't look ahead, okay? Allison was like, you're so serious about this. But I think it helps if you kind of do it organically along the way, all right? So I'm gonna time us for 2 minutes, and I want you to write down as many memories that just come to mind, okay? Childhood memories are best. So I wrote some examples here. So with dad in a car during a rainstorm, age 9 or 10. Back of a pickup on I-10, age 12. It doesn't have to be anything fancy. We're not going to read them out loud. Okay? And so just write as many as you can. And I'll tell you when to stop. So go. And doesn't have to be pretty. Doesn't have to be anything. Doesn't have to be a full sentence. "50 seconds to go. See if you can keep your pen to the page. Everybody's doing great." All right. Find a good stopping place. All right. Now, if you have room on your page, or if you need to go to another page, draw a full page spiral like this. Do you see it?
It's just, it's not great. I actually just drew it. It's
So just a big spiral on your page. All right. Count. Got it. Okay, now without thinking too much, pick one of your memories that you want to write more about. You can just do it in your mind, or you can write it on your spiral. And then take out a clean sheet of paper and draw a paper-sized X, like this. Like so. So you're making yourself kind of a little grid.
This.
Okay. Now you got your memory, you got your X. So in any direction on the X and any style, I want you to respond to the following questions. I put them on your sheet, but I'm also going to read them out loud, so you can just go along with me if you want. Okay? So first is, where are you? Anywhere on your X, any direction, where are you in your memory that you picked? What time is it?
You saying that?
Yeah, anywhere you want on the X. Yep.
Mm-hmm.
I typically go down the sides for the first few and then start another one, but any way you want. The idea is to get your mind free so you can kind of not think too much about it, just put it down. So you got, where are you? What time is it? What season is it? Where is the light coming from? What is the temperature? What do you smell? What are you doing? From tapping your leg to sticking your finger in your brother's ear or whatever, right? Doesn't have to be profound. Who is there with you? What are they doing? I like how everybody's writing in their X differently. That's the idea. Why are you there? What do you see to your left? What do you see to your right? What is behind you? All right. So we got that down. We've explored a little bit of the sensory details and how you can jump into them. So now I'm going to talk a little bit more about setting as character, okay? So in some rooms, we're always trapped. You enter them with grim purpose and escape them as soon as you can. I always think, I used to work in a jail, and every 2 days it'd be like, okay, I got to go in here, take everything in my pockets, and then enter a new world and come out. Others feel warm and safe, soft light and snacks. Expectations are to nestle and carouse and let go, right? The other night I was on Dauphin Island. Have y'all been there? Yeah, right. Okay. And I saw across the water, somebody had like a big picture window overlooking the bay, and you look in and it's just like warm, soft light and like art hanging from the ceiling, and I just thought, I want to move in there. That kind of place, right? Cold weather can give you energy, wake you up like an ice bath, or it can cause you to get congested and search for a place to get warm and breathe easy. Some landscapes lift you up, some bring you down in the dumps, right? And everybody's different, so every character is different. Nothing happens nowhere. Even if the fictional town is called Nowhere, which I've read before, the reader must be convinced that they're in a place or time, for better or worse, right? I like to think of it like this. If you have human characters in no place, they have no atmosphere. They can't breathe, right? Literally. Your character's going to die if they're no place. So yesterday I was in New Orleans, and I attended this reading on Bayou St. John. And the idea was it's supposed to be a COVID-safe reading. They were outside. And the readers were reading about trauma. They were reading about health stuff, about Greek mythology and Medusa and stuff. And it was so serious, but all around there was like geese. The geese were flying over and screaming in our faces. A passerby played an outdoor piano, and he played like everything from the Beatles to like, I don't know what cartoon, like the theme from Jeopardy and stuff, Someone did a bit of weed whacking nearby. So church bells went off a few times. One time when the person was saying, and my mother died, and it was like, and then the next time it said, and then it was kind of like my poem. It was like, and then my chest expanded, and then the church bells went off. And that informed the poem. The other one took you out of it, right? It changed the reading completely, and it made me think about our setting, right? How does the setting act as a character on us? We planned this reading. We invited these poets. We knew what they had on the page, but the world had its own ideas, right? And those interruptions sometimes took us out of the reading, sometimes brought us in, right? And so how can we incorporate that in our work? How can the setting inform what we're doing, you know. And as a consumer, you know, it can just take you out of it, turn you to the left, to the right, behind you, like our prompt does, right? And it's just central to the experience. Yeah. So here's an example from another poem. It's another walking around poem, okay? But it's different, and think about how it might feel different because the environment is a character, right? It's called Mississippi Nocturne. To steal watermelon, you must be willing to eat their hearts and leave the rest. To steal watermelon, you must be ready for scared snakes in the dark grass. To steal watermelon, you must walk with all that lives in thickets, brambles, unworn paths. To steal watermelon, you must be in cahoots with the unknown. Have some kind of spirit about you. To steal watermelon, you must steer clear of any other vine, the changes it puts you through. You gotta run all the time. To steal watermelon, you must leave your shoes off in the mud. They remain there empty, looking like you were snatched. To steal watermelon, you have to dream of having a taste for something. Have to test run sugar water on your tongue. Hope the scarecrow doesn't have a gun, right? So that poem came from this story my uncle told me about how they used to steal watermelon, and then the owners would come after them trying to shoot them, right? And it sounded really scary. They were little, right? And they were just wanting some watermelon. And so thinking about, okay, there's the walk by the bayou and the kid with the yellow snake, the environment's working for us there, and talking through till we get to the crescendo of the chest, right? And this one, the environment, it's dark. You know, you got to leave your shoes behind because you're running so fast. Someone really has a gun. You might be in danger. Your life might be in danger, right? So being chased, it's nighttime. The spirits are out. The urgency is on. There's something sweet at the end, but it could cause injury, discomfort, snake bite, even the speaker's life, right? So if we think back to rhythm, pacing, tone, think about how those two poems and the environments they're in inform what's being said, right? And make you understand how the character's breathing in that atmosphere, right? So the setting as a character using sensory details, all right? So in our last little time left, I want to do an exercise that I call the mayhem from the Allstate commercials exercise. Do you all know that guy? You know, it's just like creating chaos everywhere he goes. You know, everything's going great, and then suddenly you set your car on fire or something, right? All right, so we're going to take this opportunity to invent a new setting that is also a character in the narrative. Think sensory details, think rhythm, go deeper. How does the color red smell, right? Anybody think, how does the color red smell? Sweet?
Poison.
Does poison smell sweet?
The cyanide smells like this again.
Oh yeah, wait, isn't there a liqueur made, right? Yeah. Oh yeah. Okay, y'all are already writing a good story in my book.
Why sit for?
I mean, when I think of red, I think of like, you know, stop sign, you know. Oh, okay. All right.
Is that what I like?
Well, even cinnamon is a little spicy.
Irritates with poison.
All right, so we're going to be looking at our childhood memory, right? So I want you to take another sheet of paper and put an X on it, a blank one. And we're going to be thinking about our childhood memory again and the time we have left. We got about 7 minutes. Think about what was loud in that memory. Think about how it could be muted. I'm just riffing right now, and then I'll ask you some questions. What is muted? Can the muted be made loud? We're going to be subverting it. Think you're the guy on the Mayhem commercial. You're going to be like just going in there going, spray, poison, I don't know. So subvert the answers above. Make your setting a chaos agent, something that creates a new tone, rhythm, and trajectory for you, the main character of this narrative, right? So if your first X was like my poem where we're seeing the kid with the snake, now it's going to be running through the woods with a gun behind you, right? So how can you subvert it? So I'm going to ask you the same questions again, and I want you to have the opposite answer, right? The mayhem answer. Turn it on its head. Make it, if it's red, make it green. If it's the sky is sunny, make it raining, right? And see how it starts to change the story, okay? So this is going to take a little bit more, creativity. You're not just remembering, but again, we're not going to read out loud. It's just for fun, just to see what setting can do, okay? All right, so I'm going to get back to our questions. You got your X. So, where are you? Turn it on its head. If you're in the car, you're on top of the car. If you're swimming, you're in the boat, right? Turn it on its head. What time is it? Opposite land. What's chaos doing, right? What season is it?
I can't good things breathe next.
Well, be in the same place, but then subvert it after that.
Okay.
That makes it easier. What season is it? So if it was summer before, we're in winter, right? Where's the light coming from? What is the temperature? What do you smell? What are you doing? In opposite land, what is the chaos agent doing here? Who is there with you? What are they doing? Maybe they're doing what you were doing before and you're doing what they were doing before. Why are you there? What do you see to your left? What do you see to your right? What's behind you? All right, in our last 4 minutes, I'd like you to just spend some time, clean sheet or not clean sheet, continuing on with one of your X's. You can do the opposite land one, or you can do the memory one, and just start writing, and don't let your pen leave the page. We're doing a free write for the next 4 minutes to try to just get these juices flowing.
Use our X to write.
Yeah. Start wherever you want. You can combine the two. You can pick the wild one. You can pick the more mainstream one. Make sense? Okay.
It really likes Southern.
I love that one. It's scary, but it's fun,
Try to write more about this.
Okay. And I'll monitor the time. I got about 3 minutes, 3.5 minutes. And you don't have to include everything in your X. You could just latch onto one of the ideas in there, anything that came up for you. The idea is to get it going. If you get stuck, you can just list sensory details, list components of the setting. We're trying to lie to our reader. yourselves about 30 more seconds. Here, I find a good stopping place. And then pass it to Allison.
Goes fast. But decision. Choose good requests. I think if you change all of these things so dramatically, it would allow you to say you're talking about the same event. Doesn't it totally change the event? It got to change all these characteristics, so you're not talking about what you were talking about before.
Well,
What gives continuity?
so the idea, that's a great question. And I don't know, you're going to address this?
No, but why don't you go ahead and answer it, and then we'll go on.
Okay. So the idea is to see how when different events come into your story, how it affects the story, right? And how it changes. Exactly what you're saying. It becomes something different, right? So the idea is setting as a character really informs what your characters are doing, how they move through the world, how the reading goes on the bayou, right? And so I'm trying to illustrate how what you choose to include changes the trajectory of the spooky light. And in that way, setting as a character in itself, like that's acting on characters.
A capital.
Yeah, they said.
I would just say is that it's a great question, and it depends on the kind of writing that you're doing, right? Because if you're doing just nonfiction, this may not work as well, right? But if imagination, if anything is a possibility, then just taking something from our own lives where we often feel more comfortable entering into our writing, right, from that place of knowing and experience, but it doesn't have to stop there. This can be a great exercise where you take something that you do feel like you know, you turn it on its head, and all of a sudden, you're not stuck with just the thing that happened to you, right? You have a point of inspiration, and you can still write about a place that you know, right? You can still take something, but now you've got a point of departure, right? But it is also, I would say, a reminder of this key idea that we are trying to underscore, which is that no setting is ever static. And that is really where we're coming from, right? Is that so often, and I'm sure all of you have done this, have written things where you said, okay, now I'm going to describe it. I'm going to describe the place. And you describe the place and you create a brick or an information dump. Sometimes we call it a long block of expository writing. And then you're like, oh, well, I've described the setting. Done, right? What we're trying to remember is that settings change, right? So quick recap here. Jessica has done a great job of reminding us of two key points here about this idea of setting remaining dynamic in the same way that characters remain dynamic. Number one, with these immersive sensory details, that the setting is not a backdrop over there, yonder, but it is something that is being experienced viscerally by our characters. And the second is this idea of overturning things, of changing them up, and that the setting becomes an agent of change in the story, right? Again, not remaining static, that they can have interruptions, change the mood, change the events. The setting isn't just something that's out there, but it is interfacing, interacting, and prompting, by necessity, a response from our characters. And for this last little bit here, I would like to think of a third way that we can play with setting and really leverage it, because that's what we're really here about. How can we get the maximum kind of leverage out of setting as an element? And I want to think about this, how not just the external world informs the events on our character, but how our character's internal landscape affects what they see in their external world. Again, the idea that landscape or setting, place, and time does not remain static, but this time around, the idea is how our mindsets, our characters' mindsets, getting back to your question, inform literally what they see out there in the setting. How changes of mood within our character's mindset changes literally what they will see in the environment out there, right? So I just want to give a really quick example that everybody has heard. Is the glass half empty? Is the glass half full? Nothing has changed about the physical reality of the glass and the milk, or in the case that I prefer to think of it, red wine or scotch. But nothing has changed, only our will that it would actually be a little bit more full than it is, right? But this is to remind us that our physical world is, right, always a perception from our mind. So that's why it is so key when we're writing, whether or not it's poetry, right, whether or not it's fiction, whether or not it's creative nonfiction, you're setting what your focal character, the camera, the mind's eye see, will change. The details that they will see, their attitude towards their environment. Is this a place of safety? Is this a place of threat? The particular details that they will pick out on the horizon is a reflection of what our character is thinking, right? So for this last exercise, that's what I'd like to do, is play with this idea of how the external is informed by the internal. And not only that, what our characters perceive in the environment. And I'm thinking particularly of our focal characters, our point of view characters. What they see can often be a clue as to what they are thinking, feeling, caring, ruminating about. It is this dynamic between the character, right, and their external environment. Okay, so last exercise here, okay. And if you want, you can go ahead and take one of these memories. If you want to use that, something that you didn't write about before, and use this as a starting place. All right, so number one, and I've given you these directions. I'm calling this same place, different views. I could have also said same place, different perspectives. Number one, just simply write down what this place is. So given some examples, a living room, my mother's back porch, the corner park where I played as a kid, just a place. Now, question number two, when you think of this place at its best, as in you feel real good about it, what are you doing there? All right, some of these same questions. What are you doing there? What's the time of day? Is there anyone who's there with you? Don't worry about making it pretty right now. Just get down the ideas, get them going. Okay, we're going to move on to question number 3. And this is going to be a free write. You're going to think about details. We're going to take a hint from Jessica's playbook and try and vary up the senses. So it could be visual details, it could be scents, it could be sounds, it could be textual details, right? But I want you to keep this caveat positive. This is you in conjunction with this setting, this environment at its best. When you're thinking of it through that filter, what are the positive details that you remember? Again, try and vary up those details so you get multiple senses here. We rely so heavily on just visual, but see if you can get a different sense in terms of the detail. I'm going to pause you here. It's wonderful to see people scribbling on the page. It's one of the most gratifying moments whenever I'm leading or teaching is to see everyone's furrowed brow hunched over a piece of paper and scribbling. So the same setting can have more than just positive attributes. If we open up a given place and we dig in a little deeper, right, we can have more than just one feeling towards it, okay? And we're about to do this with the exercise, but I want to just kind of give you an example. For instance, if I walk down a downtown New Orleans street in the middle of the day, I can feel a real charge. It's electric. People are going about their business. The crowds are there. There's the skyscrapers, whatever. I come back to that alone at night. I feel very differently, right? And sometimes it can also be seething and electric and whatnot, but it can also take on potentially a feeling of foreboding or danger. It's the same place, right? All that's changed is, right, why I'm there or the time of day. So the same setting can hold a wealth. We can use the exercise that Jessica said and just overturn something, make up something, but we can also recognize a range of emotions that our characters, whether or not they are us as narrators or characters that we have made up, can feel ambivalence, multiple emotions towards the same place. So I would like you now to go back to this place, okay? And I would like you to think about pivoting here to a different emotion that you might feel in this place, right? And only you can know this. But it might be one where it suddenly was no longer just positive. It might be bittersweet. It may have become a place of concern, a place of regret, even a place of threat. Try and locate what that emotion is. And was there a given time in which, and I am asking you, quite frankly, for something that is more negative, more troubling, to go to that place? Did you ever have that moment in this location? Even if it's just not as positive as where you were before. Now, through that lens, I'd like you to pick out 5 or 6 details with the lens of concern, threat, regret. What are the details you now see in this environment? Details that give you a concern, maybe even an alarm.
Sweet. The
And last question. I'd like you to focus on one detail. All you need to do is name it to yourself, but it has a specific function, which is that this is a slightly triggering detail. It is something that represents something that feels unresolved, a concern, something that feels like potentially trouble, or something from the past that is unresolved. In other words, you're looking at this setting and you're picking out something that your mind is mulling over, ruminating on, that signals something that is unresolved in your mind. It could be a problem that's already happened. It could be a problem that is threatening to come. What might be that point of concern? And what is it in this environment that's reminding you of that? It could be a detail that reminds you of another person who inhabits this space or that you're with, right? The concern could be a person, a situation, the setting itself. Okay, guys, I want to, in the last few minutes that we have here, I just want to suggest something, that this last question about how you can use a physical detail as a potential trigger, right? As spotting something on the horizon in a room in a given setting and letting the setting be a reflection back to what is concerning our character, our narrator. That is a very, very useful question. Number 6 is how you start to find where you can go with the story, right? This is something that if you want ideas for a story, you can come back to this. And through something that is spotted in the setting, we say, uh-oh, here's the hint of a problem. And this is going to be further developed in the story, right? But it allows you to have a very organic way in terms of a character's environment to bring up an issue that you want to come back to and riff on and explore and develop in the story. Number 6, this question, even though it's the toughest, and one of the reasons why it's the toughest is because it hints at a problem. No problem, no story, right? So this one is a real gift. As we finish up, I wanted to just say is, I have a novel that is coming out, and I wanted to read this to you very quickly. My novel is, if you could just pass those out, Jessica. I tried to find from my novel, it's coming out this June. In the same way that Jessica pulled from her poetry, I wanted to just pull one page here where I attempted to do all the things that we had talked about today, use setting as immersive, use setting as an agent of change, and to use setting as an example of how we can have an external world reflecting what our character is thinking or feeling. This is from the end of chapter 1. The basic setup, and this is based on a true story, it's historical fiction, but based on a true story, is of a missing explorer in China, the man who found actually the Meyer lemon. Meyer himself went missing from a boat in the Yangtze River in China in 1918. And the vice consul who has been tasked with going upriver and finding this missing explorer, his name is Sakobin. He does not want this case. He thinks he will fail. And I just wanted to read this passage. He is in Nanking, and this is on the eve of his departure. The strand below thrums with passing voices and rickshaws, the clang of cleavers. In Shanghai, the docks around the consulate were swept clean of street vendors, but here in Nanking, dusty little Nanking, the smells stay thick and close. Garlic, ginger, scallions, blistering chilies, frying fish, the loamy scents of tofu, mushrooms, and cabbage. He'll need to stop on his way back to his apartment. He hasn't thought to eat since receiving the consul's cable before lunch. By 7:30, his throat feels too flayed to continue. He smokes like a chimney. He dumps the ashes from the teacup into the waste bin and returns the remaining Chesterfields to the drawer. As always, the blue envelopes are there, their edges puckered with use. 3 letters, the contents of which he could probably recite from memory. For weeks he'd held out hope that another envelope might arrive, having been waylaid in the post or found among Ethan's effect after the fact. Ethan is his missing fighter pilot brother. But none have ever appeared, and now the wish that one might seems as much a delusion as the idea that his brother might still be found. The sun makes a brilliant last hurrah and drops below the horizon. Below his windowsill, the lamp men are lifting their poles to hang lanterns along the cobbled bund. From afar, the effect is like a string of flickering pearls. Again, his Professor Everton's words sound in his head. Mark my words, gentlemen. China is very old and full of ghosts. At the time, Sakobin and his classmates brashly dismissed the pronouncement as romantic sentiment, as nothing more than an old man pining for the adventures of his youth. But what had any of them known about China then? Absolutely nothing. Now Sakobin wonders if his teacher's words hadn't revealed a singular, haunting truth. He takes his jacket from the chair back, stuffing his tie and the shirt collar in the pocket. There, under the scrimshaw from Everton, he catches sight of the cable from the captain inward and remembers Meyer. He keeps letting himself forget. By tomorrow, he and the interpreter Lin will be far beyond the river's bend at Chase's house in Wuhu. The mere thought exhausts him. Briefcase in hand, he casts a final glance over the disappearing river. Scattered lights from the anchored boats dot the dark gleam, and he strains to make out the shadows among the rolling black waves. But of course, there's nothing, no one there, and he pulls the window down, the curtain shut. I want to thank you all so much for your participation and your good camaraderie in following along with our exercises. If anyone has a question, we would welcome them. Yeah.
Was all my writing supposed to sound like it? I'm going like, oh, with the swing, I should have had the clanging of the tape, you know what I mean? I'm going like,
If I could only tell you how many times I edited this first chapter, right? You would probably weep for me. You'd say, bless your heart, because it takes a long, long time. But why I wanted to bring it to you is that I actually don't think it's a surprise that I ended this chapter with setting. It becomes so important, unlike a character. But thank you. I think you mean that as a compliment. Thank you. Thank you. Yeah.
2 quick questions, I guess, about
one, how
yes, the author addressing your audience. How explicit should you be about setting as how suggestive of what you want them to take its setting to need, given people's perception vary? And then along with that, second, how do you make the determination which of the details and your details in sensory
Very.
want to emphasize?
Right. Do you want to? Okay. Well, I'm going to say there's, of course, no one formula, right? And in presenting these ideas about setting, the idea is that you're using setting as a toolbox. I think that there are some places where setting may fade a little bit more into the background, where it may not be quite as important. But what we want to give you is the opportunity for setting to become, right, a dynamic force. And the idea that you can leverage it more than I would say the average writer does. In terms of your question of how much you offer, right, you really want to make that part and parcel of where your character and your narrator is at. Right here, the idea of a river, of going upriver, of going into the unknown, of having a brother who has disappeared probably over a body of water, right, all becomes really important. So I want to spend time there, right? I want to absolutely immerse my reader. I also cannot make any assumptions about my reader having any notion of what this part of the world looks like. So I might have to give a little bit extra, right? I might not have to give as much extra about a Starbucks, right? So it depends also on, right, unless something really amazing is happening in the Starbucks, and I would love for something amazing to happen in the Starbucks for the story. But there's no one size fits all. The last part of that question is, we don't always want to overload. We have to be careful of the pacing and the rhythm. We do want, however, to strike that magic of giving enough detail that our reader starts to fill in some of those blanks. I wish there was a more clear-cut way to answer your question, but I really believe it depends on A, the work, B, the given material, and C, where your character is at, right?
Sometimes think of it like you're in the dark and you have a flashlight and you're in charge, and you're putting the flashlight on the objects and the experiences that you want your reader to have. I think sometimes as a writer, I forget that I'm in charge, right? You're making the world. They don't know what's in the world. You're choosing what the spotlight goes on and why. And like Allison's saying, you want to dwell on the areas that you want people to remember and take with them according to the story, right? For me, when I was talking about poetry, I wanted a lot of space in the one with the yellow snake because I wanted to fill in their own feelings about adding instead, just like that. But in the other one, I wanted to go fast because I wanted people to be running through the woods with the narrator, right? So it's about pacing, tone, and you're in charge, right? And where you're putting your spotlight. I love the object prompt because, of course, I was thinking about all the books I've read where there's an object that follows you through the whole book, right? It has such meaning. So I think, you have to make some choices, basically.
It's a really good point that you make, which is the more details you add on, by definition, you're asking the reader to absorb them, and then the pacing is going to slow. So even the phrasing of the details, right? Do we have more lyrical, right, phrasing that's going on, more crisp phrasing that's going on? This is going to affect, and we have to always ask ourselves, what's that trade-off? Momentum versus detail. We're often making that trade-off on a page. And sometimes you want the reader to linger. In this particular passage, I can say yes, because I wanted a character who is moving slowly, who is not wanting to go upriver, who is ruminating, who is right. So I am deliberately taking more time here. But in other places, I want that action to go much more quickly. So I have to create this world through much fewer and sharply phrased details. It's a great question.
Remember very quickly, quick following. So sometimes the character, based on what you said literally, can be the setting.
I'm saying is that setting can function much like a character can in a story, and that settings can be A, as distinct as a human being, B, as dynamic and shifting as human beings in different, right, personality, moods, and so forth. C, setting can act like other characters and create changes in the storyline. And lastly, right, what setting can do is be a reflection of what our characters' mindsets, emotions, and ruminations are, right? They can be a foil, a mirroring of what's going on internally. So that's what we mean by setting as character.
Thank you for your question.
Yeah, great. Yeah.
So really, I think about the Starbucks that I was thinking about your shining to you going to my dog.
Good point.
Something I could add I mean, I understand about companies they are when she's something they are, but something you was not that, and that can be anything like the sticker with the circle and the line, the list on the line forbidding gun. You're not gonna see anything on that. So that's it. To me, good. The other question. All right, guys, if you are interested, we have email sign up. If you did not get a chance to get a notebook for you, let us talk about the you definitely encourage you and you can forward to the content website. Thank you so much. There's something on success.